I'm Grigor Fedan, author of The Templars, Two Kings and a Pope. And I have been invited by the family of the descendants of Lord Othon de Grandson, who figures prominently in my book. And he was instrumental in what happened to the Knights Templar. And I've been invited by his family to the descendants of Lord Othon de Grandson to give a presentation on a talk on what happened to him, what he did, what he accomplished. So what you're about to see is the proceedings of that talk. Afterwards, we'll show you around. We'll show you where the talk took place, the ancestral home of this family. Thanks. Good morning. My name is Grigor Fedan, and I've come to tell you about your ancestor, Lord Othon de Grandson. He was known at his time, and today in Switzerland, as a great diplomat. But he was so much more. He was so much more. And I think you will be gratified to know what he did and exactly what we owe to him. Otto was born in Grandson, as his name implies, on the shores of Lake Neuchâtel in what is today Switzerland. He was born in the Pays du Vaud, which is a canton, one of the many cantons that comprise Switzerland. A canton is a region, is simply a geographical region, a division. And Pays du Vaud, the canton, was under the jurisdiction of the Count of Gascony. And they were basically the powers that be at the time. Was the French king at the top, then the Pope, and third down the line was the Holy Roman Emperor. What Otto had to face was a very powerful French king who was going to become emperor and very likely have control, complete control over the Pope, over the papacy. So he was threatening to become not just the most powerful man in the world, but also he was a very brutal and terrible tyrant. And it became Otto's mission to stop him. And in the process, Otto ended up founding the new Republic of Switzerland, a democratic republic. The first republic, the first democracy in the world since the end of the Roman Republic at the beginning of the Roman Empire in 24 BC. And I'll tell you how that came about to finding out about Otho. I started out by wanting to write a book, a factual book about the Knights Templars. And when I did, I discovered some inconsistencies that as a researcher, I've been doing research for 25 years. As a researcher, they stood out. There were things that just didn't make any sense. And it was obvious to me, became very obvious that someone had actually purposely tried to hide the facts. And then there were errors, there were mistakes, there were contradictions. So in working out through the contradictions and digging deeper, I found in the Templars, I found that there were two distinct types of Templars. There was the regular rank and file, which at times could be extremely fanatical. These were the fundamentalists. And within them, functioning within them, was this group of Gnostics, of mystics. And as it turned out, the mystics, the Gnostics, seemed to be in control. They seemed to provide the guidance for the Templars. Soon I found that there was a secret entity, a secret Gnostic entity called the Brotherhood. And they weren't exposed until the 17th century in a publication that was called Fama Fraternitatis, that talked about the Brotherhood and how they founded the Templars, the Templar Order. Now, it was interesting because there were so many symbols, Gnostic symbols, and that's what led me down the road to Gnosticism. Like their cross, which were a cross of 4 extremities the same size, which signified balance, I found, in Gnosticism. And the fact that it was red, which symbolized red in Old French was rosé, which could mean their color red, but also the flower, the rose. And then I found that in Gnosticism, they believed that when you reach the highest form of attainment, which in their words is the knowing or gnosis, what we might consider self-realization or enlightenment, that there is, once you reach that state, that there is a faint smell of roses. And that's why they have the rose as the red color and the rose as their symbol. So the cross was painted red. It was 4 extremities the same size. They also had a battle cry and salutation, Buissant. Some historians believe that Buissant means be well, which is a very interesting way to march into battle, shouting be well. But in fact, it means be whole, be complete. And wholeness and completion is what Gnosticism is all about. So it made sense. Things started to make sense once I started digging deeper into Gnosticism. And also I found that they did have the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail was very real. But it wasn't a cup, it wasn't a vessel, a drinking vessel. It was a document written, authored by Jesus. A Jesus gospel. And this was the treasure. This was the one thing that they carried with them and they wanted to protect, because it symbolized not just the document, but also the teachings of Jesus. What has been found out in later years, in 1947, what was discovered in 1947 were the Nag Hammadi library that contained these Gnostic teachings of Jesus, what the Templars had at the time. And in the Nag Hammadi library, there's the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of the Savior among the most salient ones. These were found to be the basis of Gnosticism, the basis of what Jesus taught. A very famous theologian, Dr. Elaine Pagels from Princeton, she translated the Nag Hammadi library and wrote a book called the Gnostic Gospels. In it, she synthesizes the teachings of Jesus, and she calls them his secret teachings, those that he reserved for the select few. And apparently, there was something like that, something very much like that, that the Templars had in their possession. And you have to realize that because of this document, because of these teachings, because it ran contrary to church dogma, that they had to keep it very much secret. That this was the reason why the Cathars, which appeared to be the founders of the Templars, the original Templars had a direct connection to the Cathars. And the Cathars were wiped out by the church, by the Pope and the French king at the time, because of the heresy, the Albigensian heresy, which basically were Gnostic teachings. So with that in mind, we realized that you do need to keep things secret, and that was the whole reason for the Brotherhood, among other organizations like the Beguines or the Begans, which were also Gnostic secret organizations. So we have the Gnostics core of the Templars, and we have the rank and file. And the Gnostic aspect, the Brotherhood, they brought out their Gnostic symbols with the flag. The Templar flag were the Peabod, which were two panels, one black and one white, side by side, that again symbolize balance and the contrast that we find in creation. We also I talked about the Red Cross and the Buisson, the salutation. They also had another symbol, which was two spades. A spade is a triangle. One spade, upward spade, symbolizes the male aspect of creation. The downward spade is the female aspect. When you superimpose the one on top of the other, you end up with a 5-pointed star. And that was another symbol that they had. Now, this leads me to the main aspect of Gnosticism, which is they believe in Christ being the male aspect of God here on earth, and Sophia being the female aspect of God. And of course, the Templars were dedicated to Christ and who they called the Holy Mother. The Holy Mother being of course, Sophia, but since they function in a Catholic world, the Holy Mother was symbolized as the Virgin Mary. But they never called her Virgin Mary. They always referred to her as the Holy Mother, which is very interesting. So we have this functioning of the Gnostic organization leading the Templar order and working very much in secret, plotting things to maintain the integrity of Jesus's secret teachings. That was their main function. But they did other things as well. It seems that they were very much involved in the bringing about of democratic rule to the world. And apparently they started with the creation of Switzerland. I don't know whether the Brotherhood approached the cantons, the Swiss cantons, first, or whether the Swiss cantons approached the Brotherhood for help. But at any rate, there was definitely they were working together. And it's very apparent that Othon de Grandson was a member of the Brotherhood. And he might have been a secret Knight Templar, a monk, because he was celibate all of his life. And as I'll explain later on, he was extremely devout and he was a meditator. he was definitely Gnostic. And he was a very powerful man within the organization, within the Brotherhood. So anyway, after finding out about the Gnostic aspect of the Templars, I also found out that there had been a secret war. A secret war between that had as its main contingent the Templars, the Brotherhood on one side, and Othon de Grandson, and on the other side, the French king, the French monarchy, and his henchmen. And the job of the Brotherhood and Othon de Grandson was to contain, to prevent the French monarch from becoming Holy Roman Emperor, and to contain him. And this they did through their secret war. Now, what are the things that led me to believe that there was a secret war? Well, let's start out with the apparent murders of the Scottish royal family, King Alexander and his sons and his infant granddaughter. They all died in quick succession, one after the other. 3 sons, his wife, who happened to be the sister of King Edward I, and his granddaughter, the Princess of Norway. They were all killed. And I said, that is too much of a coincidence. Then I analyzed the battles that took place in the early 14th century. The Battle of the Golden Spurs in Flanders, the Battle of Morgarten in what is today Switzerland, and the Battle of Bannockburn in Scotland. And they all had these things in common. One was the weapons used and the tactics used. For the first time in history, in Flanders, infantry was able to defeat cavalry. And not just cavalry, but the greatest cavalry in Europe, besides the Templar cavalry. And that there was nothing compared to the Templar cavalry, but the greatest cavalry at the time was the French. That was the most powerful cavalry. And they came to Flanders to stop a rebellion. And they were met in a plain outside a walled city. And that was the Battle of the Golden Spurs. And the infantry, these were guildsmen that were trained, highly trained guildsmen, highly disciplined, that stood with these pikes, these 12-foot pikes. And the pike, they were able to put it on the ground and put a foot against it and hold it in place, waiting for the cavalry. It wasn't just the fact that these men used the pike. It was also the fact that they were highly trained, that these people were very well trained. And it spoke of Templar training. Knights Templars obviously trained these people, because there was nobody else that could have imparted that type of training. Now, the same thing happened in the Battle of Morgarten. And it wasn't just a question of the weapon used, but also the fact that the cavalry was lured into a place of battle where they couldn't do a full charge. In the case of the Golden Spurs, the terrain was very uneven. In the case of Morgarten, it was hilly. And in Bannockburn, it was boggy. It was a bog. Now there was also physical evidence that there was a report of sightings of very well-known Templars in all three battles. So the connection is there with the Templars and these battles. And there was also the part about Aquitaine. See, King Edward was also the Duke of Aquitaine. And he owned that because he inherited the duchy from his grandmother, who had been Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, King Philip wanted to take Aquitaine back from the English. And so he went into battle, he went into Aquitaine. Actually, the story about how he initially wrestled Aquitaine from Edward was very interesting. He told Edward's brother, Edmund, who came to negotiate the whole issue of Aquitaine, he told Edmund, look, you give me Aquitaine on paper. It will satisfy my critics, my parliament. And then after you do that, that will be a grand gesture. I'll give it back as a noble gesture. I said, I'll give it back. Well, Philip never gave it back. So from then on, King Edward and the Templars were trying to wrestle Aquitaine back. And again, we find an instance where the formerly poorly trained knights from Aquitaine all of a sudden were able to hold back the French in Aquitaine. So it was a form of guerrilla warfare, what we would consider guerrilla warfare, or asymmetrical warfare. The same strategies, the same tactics were used in Flanders. After the Battle of the Golden Spurs, the Flemish kept the French occupied with ongoing harassing tactics where we would attack, retreat, and hide. So that kept the balance of power, that kept the French occupied. And by occupied, I mean preventing them from invading England. Because as it turned out, and Othon found out, there had been a master plan, a French master plan. And the master plan started out by having the Turks defeat the Christian armies in the Holy Land and kicking them out. So the Templars would be in Europe rather than being partially or mostly in the Holy Land. Then the second stage would be for the French king to actually nominate, to actually elect one of his bishops, Pope. And this he did. Bertrand de God was a French bishop who became Pope. And he was very much in the French king's power. Then the third part of the plan involved getting rid of the Templars. Getting rid of the Templars because they posed, not only did they pose a military threat, but they also supposedly had a lot of money. and Philip laundered their money. So he would accomplish two things: get rid of the threat and get their money. And the following aspect of the plan was to invade England and neutralize the only other monarch that could pose a threat, and that was the King of England. So by neutralizing Edward, by not neutralizing Philip, the Templars and Othon managed to also prevent the invasion of England by the French. At the same time, of course, on the other side, Philip was making trouble for Edward in Scotland. I mean, with the rebellion in Scotland having to do with John Baliol, who was the first claimant to the throne. And this is what happened. I mean, let me back up a little bit. After the Scottish royal family were killed, the Scottish barons asked Edward to become sort of a regent, temporary regent, and to oversee the selection of a new king, a rightful king. Well, Edward didn't quite do that. Goaded by his own bishop, Anthony Beck, he decided that he wanted to take Scotland for himself. So he marched into Scotland with Beck by his side, and they decided, and Beck basically took over Scotland, and he started apportioning land to his family and friends. So we have that thing going on, and of course the French king was helping the rebels fight the English. So we have this tug of war: Scotland, Aquitaine, Flanders, and ultimately Switzerland. But Switzerland was not really a player. Switzerland was a separate thing. What happened in 1293 is 3 forest cantons, which were way high up in the mountains, they formed a federation. And really invading them, fighting them would have been too troublesome. But eventually they did, and the Austrian Duke did send his troops. And I told you about the Battle of Morgarten. So anyway, let's pause for a minute. Let's pause for a second and go back to the beginning. How did Othon de Grandson end up in such a position of power? It's interesting. It seems that the forest cantons at the time had a plan, and I think they were coached by the Brotherhood, saying, look, you don't have any daughters that anybody wanted to marry, or any sons, because you're too poor. Nobody wanted to, they were not valuable. They were not anybody who wanted to be in alliance with them. So instead they decided, we'll send our sons, we'll send our little children, small kids, I mean, we're talking about 6, 8 years old, to the different courts in Europe. And hopefully they'll befriend somebody who will eventually become a king, or somebody very powerful, or maybe they'll be elevated to the position of power. You have to remember that at the time, French was the common language of the courts, what they call the lingua franca, which actually means the language of the Franks. But anyway, what's important to know for our story is that the court in England spoke French, thanks to the Norman invasion, to the Normans. So they were all French speakers. So if you have a Swiss child coming into the English court who spoke French, he wouldn't be treated as a foreigner, he will fit right in. And this is what happened to Othon and his brother Guillaume, or William as they call him in England. They came as children about 6 to 8 years old. And Othon was very lucky. He became friends with the young prince who would become Edward I. They played together, they grew up together, and somehow when Edward became not just prince, but king, as they grew up, Othon became indispensable. He was a counselor, he was a friend, he was a counselor, and when Philip became king, Othon became his chief diplomat. He was just very skillful, very good, intelligent man, and it seems, just by watching him, watching all his, how he performed, that he must have been trained, highly trained, or coached along the way, and I suspect that that was the role of the brotherhood. But anyway, that's how Othon became such a powerful figure. He became Edward's right-hand man. And his function was to work alliances, mostly alliances and peace treaties. Alliances meant marriages. He arranged marriages, a lot of marriages. At the time, if you were a count somewhere and your daughter wanted to get married, you had to ask permission of your overlord. It wasn't just a question of allowing her to. No, the overlord had to provide permission, and because things were not simple. As I said, it was a complicated game of making alliances. So whoever was getting married would have to be done. It had to be done very carefully and well thought out. So anyway, that was Othon's function mostly. But anyway, and that's how he was known. I mean, that's his reputation. Today in Switzerland, if you go to Switzerland, most people will say, oh yeah, he was a great diplomat. But that's it. However, a handful of historians have found out the truth. His role in the Brotherhood, his role in actually founding Switzerland. And let me tell you how that came about, how that actually worked out. I told you about the battles, I told you about Scotland, but I haven't really discussed the, and the French plan. I told you how the French plan was going to go down. Now, Othon had a very sophisticated network of spies. And most of them were funded by the Templars, and we know that because he was apportioned £2,000 a year from the Templar treasury. That's well documented. That's an operational budget. So he got a hold of the French plans. Remember what I told you. Kicking out the Christian armies from the Holy Land, getting rid of the Templars, invading England. But Othon knew that if he came out and told people about the French plan straight out, that he would show up his hand. People will know, Edward will know that he had spies other than what he provided. And of course, the King of France will get a hold of the information and say, well, how is he finding out? So anyway, what he did, apparently what Othon did is he came up with a prophecy. And I'm very sure that he used a very known prophet at the time called Caesarius of Heisterbach. And he ascribed to Caesarius the prophecy that the Christian armies will be thrown out of the Holy Land and that the Templar order will be destroyed by the French king. Well, that seems to be the major components of the prophecy. So once that was out, he was able to not just warn the brotherhood, but also the rank and file. He would know that the rank and file, the Templar rank and file, would know about the French scheme. And this is how it worked out. It's very fascinating. When the French king, he threw the Christian armies out of the Holy Land, and the Templars were all in Europe, so all well within reach. Then Philip just tells his Pope, I order you to tell all the kings of Europe to arrest all Templars in Europe, starting with France. So that he did on the infamous day of Friday, October the 13th of 1304. There was a French troops descended on Templar castles, farms, and Templar houses throughout France, wanting to arrest all Templars. And they expected to find their treasure. The interesting thing is that at the time there was a Templar fleet in the port of La Rochelle. On that day, the Templar fleet disappears. And when the French troops descend on the castles, they find only old men. There were 5,000. They were able to capture 5,000 Templars, not just in France, I mean all over. Scotland, England, everywhere. 5,000 Templars. And they were all mostly old men. The total population, the total Templar population at the time was 15,000. So there were 10,000, 2/3 of the Templars were missing. And no treasure, no money to speak of. Where did they go? Well, remember the 3 cantons that form a federation. Part of the Templars went over there to Switzerland. And the other part of the Templars went to Scotland. And they settled in both places. But they had to merge in, they had to disappear. In Scotland, since they were helping Robert the Bruce and his brother with their fight for independence, it was very easy. Robert the Bruce and the lands that he controlled, he just never touched the Templars. And to satisfy the church, the Catholic Church, the Templars simply turned over their possessions to the Hospitaliers on paper, because Templars just continued to live in the premises. I don't know if they wore their habits anymore or not, but probably not. But anyway, and in Switzerland, the Templars in Switzerland continued their business of issuing letters of credit, which is what they had been doing all along and how they made most of their money. You know, when merchants would want to go from one fair to the other, there was very high risk that they would be met by bandits on the road. So a service that the Templars came up with was to issue letters of credit to merchants and say, yeah, you give us £100 and we write you a letter of credit for £100, which you can redeem at any Templar house. And it's only in the merchant's name, so a robber would be worthless to a robber. So anyway, in Switzerland they continued almost seamlessly. The day, Friday, October the 13th of 1304, that's very same day, the Templars in Switzerland started issuing letters of credit. So no loss, absolutely no loss there. Then the fact remained that that the French could still be a threat. And although, or the Templars increased the pressure on Aquitaine, Flanders, until Philip had to sue for peace, had to ask for a truce. He had to ask for a truce. He just couldn't take it anymore. He was being run down. And at that point, the Brotherhood knew that they were neutralizing this threat, neutralizing this man. Well, they succeeded beyond their dreams. Philip's 3 ministers, Enguerrand de Marigny, Guillaume de Nogaret, and what was the third one? Anyway, there were 3. They all died. They all died one after the other. And actually, King Philip also died very conveniently. He went, he was on a hunting vacation, and apparently he liked to joust. And while jousting, his lance broke, and a splinter from his lance went right through the eye slot of his helmet and got embedded in his brain. Interesting to know, that's exactly how the Saracen on the Holy Land used to kill Templars. They used to shoot arrows right through the eye slot of their helmets. So it seems that there were a lot of things that the Templars picked up from their enemies in the Holy Land, and including the pike that I told you about, and this little trick. But anyway, King Philip was dead. His son was no match. Essentially nothing like his father. And eventually what happened is that the French and the English got involved in their 100-Year War. The 100-Year War is famous by, Joan of Arc. And that kept things fairly neutral, fairly peaceful for anybody who wanted to start a democratic government in Switzerland. Eventually, more cantons joined the federation, including Pays du Vaud. Actually, that led to the American Revolution. You have to remember that that's what we owe the Swiss. That's what we owe Othon de Grandson in the States. And actually, all of Europe. Because in the States, you have to have a basis. You have to have a building block for what you're doing. You can't just come up with it's interesting, you just can't come up with a revolution of doing away with a king. I mean, the only format that the norm is, if you have a government, you have a king who's there by the grace of God, who's appointed by God. You don't just have people rule themselves. That's just not done. But that's what the Swiss did, and eventually the Americans did the same. And there's a physical connection. Very interesting, a physical connection. When the Brotherhood got to Scotland, remember they had already worked with guilds in Flanders. I told you that the infantry in Scotland were guildsmen, textile guildsmen. So the Templars had already worked with some guildsmen. And when they got to Scotland, they naturally looked for guildsmen. to work with. But this time, they wanted an organization that could act as a safe haven for what they called the knowing, their secret, the Jesus gospel. And they found a guild. They needed people who were well learned. They couldn't just have anybody. And they found in the Masonic guild, they found people who knew mathematics. They were basically engineers. To build those wonderful cathedrals, to build the bridges, you need engineering skills. Unlike most people in Europe, they knew how to read and write, and they knew mathematics. They were learned, man. So it appears that the Brotherhood came into Scotland and they transformed this guild into something that they wanted. They transformed it into a secret Gnostic organization. And that's what the Masons became. Now, the founding fathers of the United States were all Masons, were all Knights Templar. When you reach the 30th degree in Masonic order, you become a Knight Templar. The last 2 degrees to the 33rd degree are just grades, degrees of ranks as a Knight Templar. George Washington was a Knight Templar, was a Master Mason. If you walk into the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., there's a beautiful painting, huge painting of Washington in full Masonic regalia. And the painting is called The Apotheosis of George Washington. Apotheosis is the transformation, or the transformation from man into God, becoming God, the apotheosis of George Washington. Benjamin Franklin, and a number of other, 3 or 4 or 5 Masons. So anyway, the direct connection, and actually the French Revolution also had supposedly a secret organization that instigated or planned the whole thing. And supposedly, they were called supposedly the Illuminati, which is, there's nothing bad about it. So apparently the Brotherhood was also involved in that. They also continue working with working in Europe with parliaments. Both the French Parliament and the English Parliament became stronger bodies that became the check and balance in government. First, check and balances against the king, the monarchy, and eventually became the legislative bodies. And there's very strong indications that, of course, the Brotherhood was involved in this. So this is what we owe to Othon de Grandson and the Brotherhood. Now let me tell you about it, just as a postscript, let me tell you what happened to Othon. Othon lived to be 90 years old. And I said at the beginning that there was strong indication that he was a Gnostic. Well, in 1304, the same year that I have to correct myself. The Templars were destroyed in 1307, not 1304. But anyway, in 1304, Othon de Grandson becomes a lay disciple of the Carthusians. And that meant that he could live with the Carthusian monks, which was a silent order that practiced silent prayer, meditation. The Carthusians are, of course, known for their liquor, and they're also known that to this day, they basically are the same order that they were when they were founded 900 years ago. They practice silence, silent prayer. Now Othon decides to build a monastery, Carthusian monastery, about 2 or 3 miles from his castle in Switzerland, and to house 13 Carthusian monks. So this was a place for him to leave his castle and go and live in quiet meditation with his fellow monks, with monks, with Carthusian monks. So this is how we know that he was definitely into meditation, into practicing the secret teachings of Jesus Christ, or Gnosticism. The last 3 years of his life, somehow Othon, at the age of 87, decides to go take up the cross, as they call it, which in this case doesn't mean to go on crusade, but to go on pilgrimage. And he disappears. I mean, there are no more letters from him, there's no more mention of him, he's gone. And apparently he's gone to the Holy Land. And then at the age of 90, he's making it back to his castle from the Holy Land. And he dies 50 miles from his castle. Today his body is interred in the nearby Cathedral of Lausanne. Now, what made Othon tick? What motivated him? I'd like to close with a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. It says, I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke to find that life was service. I served, found that service was joy. Thank you.
It's slightly uneven.
Yeah, been the test in there, yeah.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, no, it is. So, it's Methodist United Reformed and Baptist and Episcopalian.